So, welcome, Simon.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to diving deep and having a good chat with you.
Yeah, me too. Me too. It's really interesting what you do. Mindful men, and you've got you got programs and all that kind of stuff. But you've also, and I'm not going to talk about. You're going to tell us about it. You've also got the Mindful Men podcast, and these came about after 20 years of undiagnosed a mental health condition. So sometimes I talk too much and give too much away. But I'm just going to let you dive in and tell us about Mindful Men and what you do.
Yeah, well, it actually came about longer than 20 years. So it was around 35 years. I sound really old when I say that. I feel really old when I say that. But 2020 happened. COVID happened, if anyone remembers COVID. I was studying master's degree of social work part-time. I was working full-time in a high-stress job. We had two kids under three, and yeah, my mental health story. And it all capitulated in what's called burnout. And this
Yeah.
is where essentially Mindful Men was born. It was this burning desire for me to start sharing and start
Mhm.
talking and exploring this concept around men's mental health, which had been living and breathing for 3 decades. And yeah, so Mindful Men came out as an Instagram page initially, for me sharing stories about OCD. So I live with obsessive compulsive disorder, burnout, depression, anxiety. What it means to be a man in 2020 at that stage, it was 2020, and beyond. What it means to be a dad. So I'm a dad and a husband. All those identity things that I have. And yeah, it blossomed from there into the Mindful Men podcast, which is just like this. We chat about
Yeah.
all sorts of things to get guys mindful. And then as I finished my social work degree, it turned into Mindful Men, the therapy business. So I do
Yeah.
one-to-one therapy, looking at groups this year as well. And I draw a lot from those 20 years of undiagnosed mental health conditions that I live with, to inform how I do my practice and how I do my social media and my
Yeah.
podcast, because I know how hard it is for guys to open up and talk and get off the bench,
Yeah.
and start
Yeah.
living
Yeah.
life. So that's where Mindful Men came from this idea of sharing, taking
Mm.
off that mask and going, you know what? This is me world. I'm no longer going to hide behind this mask that told everybody that I was okay, that I was strong, that I was,
Mm.
macho and all those masculine things that we do.
Yeah.
I'm actually vulnerable and I'm hurt and I need to heal. And I'm looking for authenticity in my life, both from myself, but also those around me. And so,
Mm.
yeah, that's where Mindful Men was born, and back a couple of years ago. And so I've been doing the podcasting thing for a couple of years now. Been on a couple hundred myself and recorded 100 myself, and this is my new addiction is talking about men's mental health. So
Oh, I love it. I love it. And it's much needed. So, so needed. When you say I've got me on two questions here and a before and after question. When you were saying that um so let's just go back before COVID. This is 20 years of undiagnosed
yes.
mental health conditions. And you said you experienced burnout. You got to a point where it was just like, I can't do it anymore. But did you, when you say undiagnosed, so clinically undiagnosed, but what were the niggles that you were experiencing? Like, how was it impacting your life?
Yeah, there's quite a few. So we've got 2 decades to go through, but I'll give you the highlight reel.
Yeah, all right.
So I grew up in Adelaide, so Adelaide, South Australia. If you've got an international guest, in the middle of Australia, down the bottom. And I grew up in the northern suburbs of Adelaide. And this is in the 80s, 90s, noughties. That's when I was born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s, became an adult in the noughties. And the northern suburbs of Adelaide is a tough place to live. It was particularly then. It was a tough place to grow up, and what it meant to be a boy and a man was really influenced by that environment. So it's an environment that's probably on the lower to middle class in the socioeconomic space. Single parent households, there's welfare, unemployment, drugs, alcohol. I grew up around, bikie gangs would have, clubhouses all around, and there's lots of crime. And I felt very unsafe growing up.
Mhm.
But the influences around, the other men in my life, so my dad, my older brothers, I've got three brothers, the sports coaches, like the footy coach, the teachers at school, even your friends at school would all say, we got to be tough, we got to suck it up, we got to be strong, because no men in my environment dare show emotion.
Mm.
In fact, they were applauded if they didn't. So I remember watching AFL footy. I'm a big Crows fan, and watching AFL footy on the TV, and our captain, Chris McDermott, got hit in the head and his blood pouring out, and it's all going down his thing. And the commentators are celebrating, like, oh, look how strong he is, look how tough
Mm.
he is. He's going to keep playing. And this was before the blood rule, where you kept
Mm.
playing, even though that was happening. And that vision imprinted in my mind, much like the vision of the Terminator and Die Hard and Rambo, all these masculine heroes, you could say, that I watched and consumed, imprinted that I needed to be tough. If I got hit, got knocked down, I needed to be strong and not show any sign of weakness. And so this is essentially what I call social constructs of masculinity.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's how we're constructed as boys and men, and it really starts from day one when you're a boy, you're a girl, you're non-binary, and you get a certain t-shirt color put
Mm.
on you from your
Yeah.
parents, and then from there you grow up to be whoever you are today. So that was the starting point. But up until 8 years old, mum used to say I was pretty happy-go-lucky. Nothing would faze me. Always had a smile, always laughing. But something changed in the schoolyard around 8 years old. And this was my entry into mental health. And so what it was another student came over to me and said, Simon, if you stop using your voice for more than a minute, you're going to lose your voice forever.
Wow.
And most people would just laugh that off. That's a bit
Mm.
silly. That's ridiculous. Go away. My brain soaked that up like a sponge, and
Mm.
I'm not sure why. And all of a sudden, I'm like, oh no, like I need my voice. Mum says I'm this happy-go-lucky kid. I like to joke. I like to muck around. I like to laugh. I can't do those things without a voice. And so that created this huge anxiety, this huge fear, and this is obsessive compulsive disorder. So it starts with an obsessive thought. So for me, losing my voice. And it's in order to reassure ourselves or to feel safe or to feel comforted, in order to alleviate that anxiety, ultimately, we have to perform a compulsive behavior. And so what I did is I started humming to myself. So every other minute, I'd go, hmm, checking that my voice still worked because I
Yeah.
was absolutely petrified of that voice no longer working. And so
Mm.
that was the entry to OCD for me. And I was doing that all day, every day, yeah, on the minute or every other minute. I wish back then, in hindsight, that I knew about these people that would take silent retreats for weeks, years,
Yeah.
whatever on end, and they would still have a working voice. I wish I knew that about
Yeah.
the world. I didn't. I didn't know anything like that. I just thought that that was, the gospel that was going to
Mm.
happen. And so I did that for about 2 years or so, and did a few other little quirky OCD things. And there's a lot around repetition of behaviors, drawing like cursive words on my arm or on a table or on my leg for some reason. I don't know why it had to be cursive, but it had to be cursive, and it had to be just right. And so this is a big part of OCD, is when we do a behavior, we have to do it perfectly, pretty
Mm.
much. Like the voice, like if I was humming to myself and I had a croaky voice, like maybe I got a bit of a cold and it didn't go like this, wasn't in tune. If it was out of tune, that would set me off, and I'd have to keep doing it until I found that pitch perfect hum, if that can be,
Wow.
if that's a thing. I don't
Yeah.
know. um,
Yeah.
but the same with the cursive writing and all these other little quirky things. But it really ramped up. So around 13 mum and dad separated. And so we became that single, parent household. And me and my little brother, we moved out with mum. And I remember, coming home and we had these black garbage bags all over the house, and it's just all of our gear. And mum loaded it in the car and off we went. And this is where my world changed essentially. And there was a notion back then, and it probably still exists, and it has existed for generations, that there's a man of the house. There's
Mm.
someone who's a protector, and that became me as a 13-year-old boy. Mum never put that on me. I put it on myself. I was influenced by those social
Mm.
constructs, that there had to be a man of the house. And so what I did was, in order to protect myself and my family, every night I would lock up the house, like an adult would. I would go around and check all the doors, windows were locked, all the blinds were drawn. And what was driving this was this obsessive thought that someone was going to break into the house and either steal our stuff, which we didn't have much. Mum had to get all this stuff secondhand from,
Mm.
wherever she could get it from. Or they would kidnap us, me and my little brother.
Mm.
or they would hurt us in some way, or they would murder us. And so these are the obsessive thoughts as a 13-year-old. And then to add to that, I had these obsessive thoughts that the house was going to burn down while we were sleeping. And so, in order to make sure that that wasn't going to happen, I would religiously go around the house and check the door was locked. And I'd touch the door and I'd push on it and make sure, okay, is this thing locked? Is it going to stay shut, when I
Mm.
walk
Yeah.
away? And then go through all the windows and make sure all the blinds were perfectly drawn shut, because I worried that if there was a slightest gap in that window blind, that someone from the outside, this mysterious boogeyman, would look in and go, "Oh, there's a TV there. I'm going to break in," or
Yeah.
"Oh, there's a child there. I'm going to go in there and kidnap them," or whatever. These are the really extreme thoughts. And then I'd go around, because of the fire thing, I'd go around and check that the stove was off and the iron was off. And we had this fridge that was really old school. I think it was in the 70s or 80s. Had like a fridge seal that was about an inch thick. And
Yeah.
it was one of those really old ones that the fridge seal was coming off of it now.
Yeah.
Now, the adult brain in me would go, you know what, the seal's coming off. It's okay. That's just an old fridge. The worst that's going to happen is that the cold stuff might get a bit warm, or it might go off. That's the adult version of me. The child version of me felt like that if that fridge wasn't closed properly, fully sealed, that the motor was going to overheat and then essentially
Burn the
break out
house.
in fire.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so I'd be always touching the fridge and checking the seal and all these types of things. And I would do this in the dark after everybody's gone to bed. And I would do this for about 3, 4, maybe 5 hours. And
Wow.
so I would go and check. I would do the first round of checking, and then I'd get to bed. I'm like, yep, I'm satisfied. Everything's good. And then my brain, the OCD brain, would go, Simon, did you really check that? Did you forget
Mm.
to check that window or that door? Um, there was no chance in hell that I had forgotten, but my brain was telling me that I'd forgotten. So, in order to alleviate that distress, off I go again. And it
Mm.
wouldn't just be that door or that window or that stove or whatever. It would be everything again in an order. And then
Wow.
I'd go back to bed, and then my brain would say, Simon, in the process of checking that, in the process of you touching that door, for example, the front door, when you walked away, somehow it sprung open
Oh my God.
and it's unlocked it because you touched it, which is not going to happen. In 99 times out of 100 times, it's probably never going to happen. Um, and if it was really bad on a windy night as well, because the wind would
Yeah.
knock it, and so I would feel like, oh yeah, maybe the door is unlocked. And so that's where OCD exploded for me at 13-year-old, doing this for 3, 4, 5 hours a night. Mum never said anything, so I don't think she ever knew I was doing it. My little brothers never said anything. In the dark, a time before mobile phones, so I wasn't walking around with a light on my phone doing all this type of stuff. I was doing it in the dark, um, living in absolute fear,
Mm.
and then so that was the major one, but it extended to the car. So when I learned to drive at 16 and got a car, my license, the things like putting the handbrake on. Like most people just do that. It's just not going to roll away. I would do that, but it would be so tight because I'd have this obsessive thought that the car was going to roll down a hill and cause chaos, like hit someone or break through a house, like you see on the news, all sorts
Mm.
of like chaos. Um, or like I'd be checking my bag and going to school, right? So I'd get off the bus or whatever I do, and I would have my books in my bag. I'd have my wallet, my keys, eventually my phone, when I got a phone. Um, and I'd go to school and I'd be like, Simon, did you bring your wallet today? Because it might have some money for lunch. I'm like, okay, I've got to check that now. I'm pretty sure I did, but I've got to check it. So I'd open up my bag. Yep, my wallet's in there. Oh, and I'll just check that I've got my keys. Yep, all good. And then I might check I've got my school books, and
Mm.
yep, they're all good. Again, put the bag on my back, walk a few meters, and my brain will say, Simon, did you really check that? Like,
Oh
are you
wow.
sure you checked
Yeah.
are your keys there? And I couldn't just say, yeah, I couldn't reassure myself that I did it. And so off came the bag and open up the bag again, check all these things, put the bag back on. And just like the front door, my brain would say, Simon, in the process of checking you got your keys or your wallet or your school books, or eventually your phone as well, it fell out your bag and you've left it back on the footpath. And so I'd be constantly looking around me like, have I dropped
Mm.
something? And the reason I was doing this again is that absolute fear that something terrible was going to happen. Like
Mm.
if I had lost my keys, I have no way to get into my house. And I didn't have a brain to process how I would navigate that, how I would figure out how to open up the house if I had lost my keys. If I lost my wallet, which might have had an ID card, and particularly when I got my license, which had my address on it,
Mm.
that sent me into overdrive because I'm like, well, now this boogeyman knows where I live,
Yeah. Yeah.
in my brain. And if he had my keys as well, he's also got a means to get into my house.
Yeah.
And so these things consumed me for 20 years. So from around 8 to around 28, um, these obsessive thoughts. And then when I entered the workforce, in my 20s, discovered this thing called Friday night drinks after work,
Yeah.
and by then I'd been drinking for about 10 years before that. So around 15 started drinking, and it was a lot of fun, a lot of socialization. But then the OCD would go into a new version of itself. It would evolve into what's called pure O. So it's not so much compulsive behaviors, it's pure obsessions that would drive me almost insane.
Mm.
And so I'd go to these Friday night drinks and I'd get loose. I would drink a lot. I'd become the party animal, dance around, might sing if there's a bit of a mic there, watch out, everybody, because I'd be getting ready for a party. Have a great night, absolute
Yeah.
great night, and go home on cloud nine. But then I'd wake up the next day and my brain would say, all right, Simon, you've had a few hours off the OCD.
Mm.
Here we go again. Let's go. And we're
Mm.
going to ramp it up to 100
Yeah.
instead of 10. And so I start this thing called pure O. So I start obsessing about the night before. And I'd try to think, oh, what happened? I'd try to piece the night together. It starts off as a bit of a giggle. Oh, you got so drunk and all this type of stuff. But then I'd go into a really dark space of what did I
Mm.
do to hurt someone, offend someone,
Yeah.
cause distress to somebody else? And this never happened, but my brain would say that I did something or I said something. And I had this, I guess, this fear of getting into trouble or
Mm.
of putting somebody else out or harming somebody else. And so this is what OCD does is it puts us in a really dark space where we think that either our behaviors or the absence of our behaviors is going to cause somebody harm, either or even ourselves harm as well. And so I'd obsessively think about these nights on the drink with my work colleagues or even with friends, if I went to a party, and I would obsess about them for days to the point where I actually lost track of what really happened and my thoughts
Yeah.
became distorted. And so I couldn't piece together a night accurately at all.
Mm.
And I would obsess about these things until the point when I either went back to work and I realized I'm not in trouble. I didn't do anything because I'm not being pulled into the manager's office or whatever. Or somebody hasn't lodged a complaint with HR about me or anything like
Yeah.
that. I'm safe, I'm okay. And so then I would start to relax. But it would be days of obsessively worrying, of freaking out, anxiety through the roof, stress, vomiting, diarrhea, like
Wow.
gastro-like symptoms, really high-end anxiety. Until, yeah, around 28, my now wife, she encouraged me to go and talk to someone. Like
Mm.
mental health wasn't part of my vocabulary. Nobody ever questioned anything I did leading up into this. So for the 20 years prior, so the humming, the checking behaviors, they did question the drinking because I was the big drinker. Like most Aussie blokes,
Yeah.
I liked a beer, and I liked a lot of beer. But I think as I got older, I think a lot of that was me trying to numb everything, to
Yeah.
slow my brain because I felt alive when I drank. I felt
Yeah.
like I didn't worry, I didn't stress, I didn't go home and check the house a million times. In fact, I probably went home and passed out.
Yeah.
So it was my night off, and I had a lot of those nights off. But at around 28, yeah, my wife encouraged me, Simon, you're drinking a lot. You're not the kind of the guy that I fell in love with. Maybe you need to go and get help. And for 2 years, I deflected that conversation. I put it back on her and said, no, I think you've got the issue. If you want to talk about it, you go see a psychologist or whatever. I'm good. I'm just going to have a weekend off the beers, or I'm going to go for a few extra runs around the block, or I'm going to try and eat healthy for this week.
Yeah.
That kind of, approach. But after 2 years, the light bulb came on and said, you know what? I think she's right. I can't keep doing this. And it was the cycle of the drinking and the Friday night drinks, which was really the thing that tipped me towards going and seeing my GP. And so that's what I did. I went to my GP and I said, I think I've got a mental health condition. First time I've ever said anything like that. And it was really hard. I actually choked on the words as they came out. And so she was really great about it, the GP. She said, you know, let's go through some questionnaires. And so we did some questionnaires, and that led me towards, you know, a mental health treatment plan, which is what the mental health care plan,
Yeah.
or vice versa these days. They keep changing the name on me.
Yeah.
Um, went to a psychologist, and she said, Simon, yeah, you've got this thing called depression. And I'd heard of depression before. I didn't really know what it was. She said, you've got anxiety. I'm like, okay, I've kind of heard of that. Don't really know what that is either. You've also got this thing called obsessive compulsive disorder. And that kind of gave me a bit of, I guess, relief getting these
Mm,
labels. A lot of people say they don't like labels, and but I felt relief. I'm like, oh, finally, I've got these labels now that I can attribute my behavior. And we tracked it back to around 8 years old when it all started in the
mm,
schoolyard. And I'm like, okay, I've got depression, anxiety, you know, OCD. I drink too much. I need to talk more, like most blokes do. But I didn't do anything about it. I went to therapy for a little while, and I got meds. So I did something with the medication, and it took a long time to find the right meds. But I expected the therapist to heal me
yeah.
and to fix me. And I didn't want to do any homework about it. And so I continued on my merry way for, you know, 8 to 10 years longer, in and out of different therapies. Nothing ever worked. Medications did a whole bunch of weird and wonderful things to me, like weight gain and lost sex drive and more anxiety and less anxiety and more
Yeah.
depression. But burnout was when it really, you know, changed for me. And I felt like I was suffocating under that mask. Yeah, I'd been talking to therapists, but outside of that and my wife, no one really knew who I was. And I was trying to be this perfect person.
Mm,
And then that was driven by that OCD stuff of getting everything just right, of trying to avoid failure, of trying to avoid getting in trouble, of trying to avoid pain, and using alcohol to do a lot of that avoidance. And that's when it all just crumbled down. My life actually stopped at burnout in 2020. I had to take 4 to 5 months off of work. I couldn't get off the couch. I was in pain in my back. I had this mysterious back pain that we attributed to mental health. I did all the scans and specialists, and nobody could figure out why my back was so sore. Nothing was showing on X-rays, MRIs, you name it. To the point where the doctor said, the surgeon said, Simon, we can go in and do surgery, but we don't know what we're looking for.
yeah. Yeah.
No, and we could cause more damage if we go in. I said, oh, you know, I don't want to do that.
Mm,
But then when I worked on my mental health, the back pain disappeared. And
disappeared. Yeah.
part of that was sharing the story. And so here I am a few years on, sharing the
Mm,
story a lot and getting a lot of energy from sharing it now, and inspiring or hoping to inspire other people to go, you know what? Yeah, like I grew up in an area similar to Simon, like the northern suburbs of Adelaide. Or yeah, I did have a drinking issue. Or yeah, I did bottle up mental health conditions undiagnosed for 5, 10, 20, 30
mm,
years. But now it's the time to talk. I think COVID has enabled a lot of us to
yeah.
start talking because we all started checking in with each other more regularly.
Yeah.
And particularly for guys, I think we took that and go, you know what? If everyone's talking about mental health in COVID, I can start to talk about this thing too and not feel
Yeah.
ashamed about it. And I think for a long time I felt that shame. I didn't
Mm.
talk about it. So there's the highlight reel.
So I'm really, no, that's a great one. I'm really interested. Did you know, once you did take the mask off and start talking, did how much of your mental health I'm not going to say disappeared, but deteriorate or reduced by itself? Like I'm not saying no to medication,
Yep.
but sometimes I think a lot of things can fix themselves to a fair degree without medication if we've got the right mental plan, you know what I mean, or
Yes.
right mindfulness. And so once you decided, I've got a couple of questions. How hard was it? You know, how hard was it to go, I'm going to completely be a different person, but I'm going to be true to myself, because there's a hell of a lot of pain in that. And
Mm.
then how much difference did it make to you, to your well-being, once you started doing that?
When burnout happened, it wasn't as hard as it was in 2012 when I got that first
Yeah.
diagnosis. That was like I was choking on the words. I didn't have the words. I didn't have the energy for it. I was zapped. And I didn't do anything. I went to therapy a few times over that 8 years since then. Um, but I never did the work. It was hard. It was like getting homework at school. No one wants to do
Yeah.
homework, and
No.
I didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
But burnout was something different. And I think because I had been priming myself over the 8 years prior, actually talking about mental health wasn't an issue. It was
Mm.
how I did it. And I think it was more the workplace situation because burnout, they often attribute it to a workplace
Yeah.
stress and really burnout. And I highlight that I was studying, working, family, mental health story because I feel burnout is much more than work. We put a lot of
Mm.
energy into our work, but it is our whole life
Yeah.
on what we were doing. And I was pulling string, I was holding strings in lots of areas, study, work, and family and mental health. And so when burnout happened, it was painful in terms of I was emotionally spent. I was on the couch every day. I had no drive. I was so cynical about the world. I hated my job, even though I did a really good job. I loved my job, but I also hated it at the same time. I felt like study was never going to end. We were in those, 0 to 3 year old, time. We had two kids under three.
Yeah.
COVID was happening. So there was a lot of negativity around, and that's often the case with burnout is we get super negative.
Mm.
And so when I hit that rock bottom, and I'm just grateful that the GP that I spoke to really gets mental health and
Yeah.
men's mental health. He's passionate about that. And he linked me in with a social worker. So I liked social work because I was studying social work. I'd never seen a social worker prior to this.
Yeah.
So I felt when I go to that therapist, I can talk social work and I get the language.
Mm.
And I think studying social work also helped me along because I knew I wanted to get into the mental health space. So I've got to actually talk about this stuff and I've actually got to do the homework. So I was on that journey already. But what the social worker did is they also have lived experience, which is what
Mm.
I loved. And they said,
Yeah.
Simon, I've experienced burnout too. I've also worked in a similar environment to you. So I worked at the public service at that stage, and she had been in the public service too as a social worker. So she really understood
Mm.
what I was talking about from a social work, but also a work perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that was really beneficial. And in fact, going to see that therapist, that social worker, was the first time ever that I had cried in a therapy session. I'd never cried before. I sucked it up. I was still the kind of like, I'm tough. I'm okay. And all those other therapy sessions. This was the first time I just let myself just go bleh, and get it all out. In fact, I had to take my wife to a session one day because I didn't know if I could even drive there. That's how broken I was from
Wow.
burnout.
Yeah.
But by doing that, having that great connection with that therapist and also my GP who was there along to support me along the way, was really useful. And it's interesting because COVID happened, the workplace that I was in had come around a long way to mental health discussions in the workplace. In fact, they had to because the union was putting a big spotlight on them around burnout
Yeah.
and workplace distress. And so they had come a long way. But I was talking to my manager after all this happened, and she said, Simon, if that happened 12 months earlier before COVID, us allowing you to take 3 to 4 to 5 months off of work probably would have never happened.
Mm. Yeah.
You probably wouldn't have had a psychologist to help you return to work on a return to work program. You probably would have been left to your own devices. And that would have resulted in me quitting,
Yeah.
my old job. So it happened at the right time for me to just to let it all out, to be fully broken, but then start picking myself up and starting sharing. And part of that story was me wanting to share burnout in my workplace because I knew how much it impacted me, but I kind of had heard other people experiencing burnout too. So I asked my boss, I said, can I come back to work? Well, eventually. I don't really want to come back right now, but when I do come back to work, I want to share the burnout story as part of my recovery. And so I put a bit of a presentation together around burnout and the workplace. And then at the end, I tacked on a few cheeky slides at the end around my story. And I say, this is important for me to share because for 20 years I didn't talk about mental health.
Mm.
And I'm a man in an Aussie workplace that's high demand, high pressure, and I want to start sharing. And so I lifted the lid on OCD and depression and anxiety. And when I did that, other people came to me and they said, Simon, I didn't know you are such a perfect performer at work. You do things the right way. There's no wrong about you. Yes, it takes me a little bit longer to do my work, but that's also that perfectionism coming out. I didn't realize that was attributed to something like obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
having to get everything perfect. Or they said to me, Simon, Yeah, I've burnt out as well. That's why I was off for 2 weeks last year. I'm like, oh, I
Wow.
thought you were on
Yeah.
holidays. I didn't
Yeah.
realize you were absolutely burnt out. They said, well, I wasn't burnt out like you for 3, 4, 5 months. And in fact, it was a longer period than that because I did a graduated return to work. So I started 1 day a week, then 2 days, then three, and I was on reduced duty. So it took about a year to get back to full
Wow.
strength.
Wow.
But they said, yeah, I've experienced burnout, or I know someone in another team that's experienced burnout, or you know, I know someone with OCD. I'm like, whoa, I've never heard that before. Like, that's really cool. And so I got a lot of energy from these presentations I did at work to the point where managed to speak to a few of the senior managers in this organization, which is thousands strong,
Mm.
and just sharing like this story around burnout. And so a lot of energy. And it came from, I think, that priming for the 8 years
Yeah.
prior of
Yeah.
starting to share that story, but not doing it fully and not really living that authentic and that vulnerable life. I think burnout happened when it needed to happen because there was a few things that just started clicking, like the social work study. Brene Brown came into my life. So vulnerability was also all of a sudden
Yeah.
a cool word, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I grabbed onto that and I grabbed onto authenticity and I started experimenting actually with my mental health journey. And so it wasn't just meds. In fact, I don't love meds, but they make me feel like
Mm.
shit. But you know, I started doing things like breath work,
Yeah.
and I never did anything like that. I did a men's yoga thing to try and manage the back, and I found so much quietness that came in the brain and my mind when I did an hour of men's work, yoga. And we were
Yeah.
all stiff as planks, but we did it, and it was nice just to have that hour to me.
Yeah.
I got into mindfulness, and this is where my mindfulness journey began. I started practicing gratitude and journaling, grounding myself with my five senses on my daily walk. So I started doing all these different things.
Yeah.
And then ultimately last year, I gave the grog away. And so my kids became a bit of a beacon of hope for me there.
Mm-mm.
We started talking about alcohol in the family, like we'd go out to dinner at the pub, and I would always say to my wife, "You're the designated driver. I'm the designated drinker because that's what I do." But then the kids, as 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, would say, "Daddy, you always drive, but why aren't you driving tonight?"
Yeah.
And to talk about it's your 3, 4, 4,
Yeah.
5-year-old kids, oh, daddy's had too much to drink tonight, and that's an important message for them to know that they can't drink and drive when they're older.
Yeah.
But it just didn't sit well with me. Like, why am I having an alcohol discussion with my kids? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so they planted a few seeds to the point where mindfulness became so prominent in my life that I decided that alcohol was no longer serving me as a 40-year-old. In fact,
Mm.
it all came to a head on my 40th when I thought I was going to get all these wonderful gifts for my 40th. The gifts that I got were all wonderful, but they were all beer. It was
Mm.
different types of craft beer. And I said to my wife, what is this? What's going on? She's like, Simon, that's the identity that people associate with you with.
Yeah.
And from that moment, I wanted to disconnect from that. I became fully mindful and said, that enough's enough. Like, I've been drinking for a long time and I wasn't really enjoying it anymore. I was just doing it for coping, to cope with
Mm.
stress, to cope with
Yeah.
anxiety and OCD. And as a social worker and therapist now, I was also drinking in a way that my clients were drinking.
Mm. Yeah.
But my clients would say, Simon, I don't know what to do. And I say, well, you've got to give up the drinking or you've got to cut back. But then I was going home and doing the exact opposite. And so I felt like a fraud as a
Yeah.
therapist.
Yeah.
And so like, you know what? I've got to start taking my own advice here. Like, I know alcohol is a depressant and I've
Yeah.
been depressed for a long time. And so the burnout story allowed me to talk about it, but also start reflecting inwards, and then mindfulness just happened to come along the journey and really change the way I looked at myself and the world around me too.
Yeah. How's it changed? How old are your kids now?
Yeah, I'm in that stage of fatherhood where I keep forgetting their ages. It's terrible because I
Oh,
say my son's 8, but he's 7, and I said my daughter was 5 this morning, but she's 4. I mean, I think they like to be those ages, but yeah, they're only pretty
still
young.
young. Yeah.
Still young. My daughter's in kindy this year, and my son's in grade 2, which I always mess those up as well. But yeah, like they're young, and
Yeah.
um, I love being a dad. I want to be a dad that's around and present and not
Yeah.
drinking, not drunk on the
Yeah.
weekend. That,
Yeah.
and I want them to see that a guy can be that person as well, that can be healthy and happy and not need something like alcohol.
Yeah. You're lucky your wife stayed with you. But
Yes,
anyway, very, very,
absolutely.
very lucky. Um, do you With the men that you work with, do you find there's a common story and or a common theme like shame or anything like that? Like,
Yeah.
are they saying to you, "Yeah, I've had this, I've known about it, I didn't want to talk about it, I was too ashamed," or like, is that a common theme in all
I
that?
think often there's a few different themes that come up actually. So one of the most common ones, which we don't often realize until I start exploring with them, is growing up when they were younger.
Mm.
What were the influences around those social constructs?
Yeah,
And there's a reason when you go to therapy that your therapist asks you, tell me about your childhood,
yeah,
because it
yeah,
sets the scene. And so
yeah.
that's the most common story is, who were the male influences in your life and what was it
Mm,
like? Were you able to share about mental health? And it's interesting because it's not always male influences. Sometimes
mm,
they might have a female like mum or grandmother or an auntie who told them that they needed to be hard and to suck it up. And so it's
yeah,
not always the dad, and that's interesting, but it's usually the father figure, or their friends, or their school teacher, or someone prominent in their life. And so that's the starting point. Other things are around, I guess, the shame and the stigma associated with it, not having the language, the vocabulary, so not able to say, I have a mental health condition, or I'm an addict, or I'm a perpetrator of family and domestic violence, not actually being able to say it and name it. So we explore all these kinds of concepts. And one more recently is actually loneliness.
yeah, yeah,
Is this deep loneliness inside, and they might be surrounded by friends for from that are decades old, these friendships, but they're talking about the same superficial stuff. Like they're talking
mm,
about, oh, how's the footy team going, or how was work, how's the kids, or if they're single, like, oh, who did you shag on the weekend, or whatever. Like superficial stuff that they haven't evolved their conversations, and so they might be surrounded by all these people, but are yearning for something deeper,
mm,
a more authentic connection, or maybe like, and this is for me as well. Like I live on the Sunshine Coast here in Queensland, so I'm not I was born and bred in Adelaide, and
yeah,
I've lived in Canberra and I've lived in Hobart. So I've had all these different periods of time where I haven't grown up where my village is,
mm,
essentially. And so I'm trying to recreate villages. And that's a lonely thing as well, because for
yeah,
anyone who's moved into state or to a different part of even their own city, trying to set up roots in a place where you haven't grown up is very challenging when you're trying to break into a new social circle, particularly
mm,
for people that have lived there the whole life. And so loneliness has been a big thing for me as well, and we talk about that in the work that I do, is trying to create your own village.
yeah,
And often you'll find, and this is the case of what I'm doing at the moment. So we created a surfing crew
yeah,
here,
yeah,
where we go surfing on a Wednesday morning, and it's interesting because a lot of the guys that are in that aren't from the Sunshine Coast.
mm,
These are people from Melbourne or Adelaide or WA or even international as well, and they're just yearning for village
yeah,
and connection. It's the same for the fly in, fly out guys that I work with as well. They're so disconnected from their
yeah,
home because they're always away for work.
yeah,
They're always providing or whatever they're doing, that when they do come home, they're so exhausted they don't have time to connect
yeah,
and build those relationships. So it certainly starts with those social constructs, but moves into this loneliness thing, which is a big, I guess, theme at the moment. And a lot of this is coming out from COVID. We
yeah,
recognize that it's important to connect. And I think
yeah,
guys, and myself included as well, are starting to connect with that as well. And I think that's a big shame piece, is saying that you're a grown man and you're lonely
yeah,
is a big thing to say. Almost as big as, oh, I'm a grown man, I've got a mental health condition, which I think that's starting to be destigmatized by conversations just like this.
mm,
But yeah, loneliness is the big next one, I think, and it's going to come for a little while too.
yeah, yeah. It's terrible, and and connection is the number one indicator about as to how long you'll live. Like
Mm.
that's actually connected to very highly connected to longevity. I'm curious about this. When you're talking about men, I read or I heard somewhere, and I put it to the test, and it's true. I've asked several guys about this. Is that you get all these gangs of blokes, and they're all, yeah, who just shag, has a footy team, rah rah rah, and then the group of them, the group mentality ends up doing something wrong, like they might belt someone up, and then the whole lot of them get in on it, that, or they all sort of, might not be that extreme, but they all go along with everything, this gang mentality. And and what I read and understood and have explored is that not one of them actually wants to do that.
Mm.
But there's this incredible fear of rejection that if I don't go along with my tribe, essentially, as you're saying, or your village, I will be booted out. And so for all of mankind's history, we never wanted to be booted out of the tribe because that ensures our survival if we stay within the tribe. So it's it's such a shame, and I'm curious about your Wednesday surfing group and that kind of stuff. Is it like that kind of gang, or I know you're going to tell me no, but like, or are all these men sort of coming together, opening up and having deep conversations while they're out in the water and that kind of thing?
Yeah, for the surfing crew, it is certainly guys that are yearning for a deeper connection, that are
Mm,
wanting to create community, to create village, to connect at a level that's beyond just the superficial stuff. We talk about superficial stuff all the time, like we're talking about the
mm,
footy this week.
yeah.
But we do go deeper, and that's because
Mm,
we're the kinds of guys, and there's a lot more guys that are doing this at the moment, which is really cool, that are going deeper, that are want to get to their true, authentic, vulnerable selves, deal with their past traumas or griefs and so forth. But as you were sharing that story around the gang stuff, it reminded me of in my teens and when I started drinking. So around the same time, towards the end of high school, American Pie, the movie came out.
yeah, yeah.
And then for anyone
Oh
who hasn't seen
God.
that, it's that college,
Yeah,
lifestyle. Everyone's drinking. It's a lot of sexual stuff.
yeah,
Like, so there was a
yeah,
lot of guys in that movie. In fact, the movie is around a premise of guys hooking up with who's the best girl that they could hook up with.
yeah,
And I remember in high school, me and my friends bought into that. And so they created some sort of game. And there was a few guys that took that more seriously. I was probably on the outskirts of that game, but they're like, oh, you get points if you do certain things at a party or whatever.
yeah, yeah.
And so I think this is a really important topic, is particularly in light of, the ongoing issues around family and domestic violence that we
Mm,
see, and males being overwhelmingly like perpetrators of family and domestic violence.
yeah.
The stats are very clear. Something like 90% of
Mm,
victims say perpetrator is a guy. And I think a lot of it comes from when we're younger, or maybe it's right back to childhood, or it might be in your teens. Certainly, a lot of influence in your teens because you're going along with these packs. You're
yeah,
finding a pack of guys or girls or whoever where you want to fit in. You
yeah.
want to be part of the crowd,
Yeah.
and so you might have one of these American Pie style games. Um, where you feel like you're obliged to participate because
Mm,
you don't want to be outcast. And interestingly, in that group of guys, over time, they changed their identities. And it was really interesting because I remember we started getting our licenses, and I was driving this old bashed up Ford Falcon, and my mate had a Gemini, another one had a Ford Escort, another one had
yeah,
the lucky one had a Tirana from his uncle or whatever. Like, so really
yeah,
like northern suburbs, Adelaide,
yeah.
blokey kind of cars and stuff. I'm not sure about the Escort, but anyway, but, and we were listening to things like
Mm,
AC/DC and
yeah.
Cold Chisel, and I guess we're conforming to that environment. But
Mm,
then something changed in some of my friends around this American Pie stage, where they turned into what we call wannabe gangsters. They started listening to rap and hip hop,
yeah,
and they really changed their identity. They changed who they were, and I was like, yeah, I like that music, but they were like trying to get into, they wanted to go around as a gang.
yeah, yeah,
And so it became a pack mentality. And I'm
yeah,
like, nah, like this isn't me. And so I started feeling outcast more and more from that
yeah.
group. And this is the group that I used to drink with and
Mm,
and party with. And it got to a point where I started to drift off into another friendship circle who were more into heavy metal music. So I came into that kind of group, but that was a little bit more chill and they were more relaxed. And but I was always torn between which group do I go to? Where's my
yeah, yeah,
friendship groups? The wannabe gang guys, they're a bigger group, so there's more friendship opportunities. And I know some of them for longer. This more heavy metal group, like they're nuclear. They're two, three guys.
yeah.
But they were tight. And like they were really they did everything together. And like, oh, which one do I want to go? Do I want more friends or do I want quality
Mm,
over quantity
yeah,
and type
yeah.
stuff? But then what happened is high school finished and I drifted off from everybody.
Mm,
And I actually became one of those guys that went into a long-term relationship after long-term relationship after long-term relationship. And I would drop my friends for the
yeah,
girlfriend and then her friends and her family and so forth. And I think that's where my loneliness came from. So when I never held on to those friendships from high school, and
Yeah.
then I've gone through adulthood yearning for friendships and trying to find a soccer club to join, or
Mm.
I tried that a few times and got injured because I get older and I'm more injury prone than I used to be. Um, or I tried to find a group of dads or something like that, something to connect with, but just
Yeah.
never could.
Yeah.
But this surfing crew, because we're doing the work, it's a very different mentality. So it's a pack mentality, but a pack of guys wanting to lift each other up
Yeah.
and hold
Yeah.
each other accountable, call each other out when we're bullshitting around something, not going into those superficial conversations and staying there, actually evolving those
Mm.
conversations, helping each other out through tough times. And then when we're on the surf, it's just really enjoying the surf for what it is, being
Yeah.
present with other guys, and there's no bravado, there's no hyper masculinity, there's no toxic masculinity, which is coming out in the media these days. But I can certainly see some of that American pieisms, and I
Yeah.
just made up a word there, in
The one.
the Tate conversations that the government's
Uh,
having, and seeing a lot of the young fellas
yeah.
in school idolizing these social media
Yeah.
characters
Yeah.
for their hyper masculinity, and you'll wonder if that is because they haven't had a positive male role model in their life,
Mm.
or they're not able to engage with their mental health, or maybe their value sets a bit out of whack, or they haven't tuned into what's there. And some of that is going to be, I guess, is it's not great to say, but some of that is them just exploring, trying
Mm.
to figure out who they are in the world. And unfortunately, hindsight's a wonderful thing. So they'll get a bit older and hopefully look back on these years and go, you know what, I was wrong. And I certainly do that with that American Pie stage that I was in. But like, hindsight's a wonderful thing. It's often once
Mm.
we've had a few laps around the sun that we realize, oh, what I did yesterday or last
Yeah.
decade or 2 decades ago wasn't great. And so
Yeah.
the challenge therein is, do I make positive change now for
Yeah.
me and also the future generation? So if I have kids, do I stop drinking?
Yeah.
Do I stop hanging around my mates who always talk about chauvinistic stuff?
Mm.
Do I actually want to embrace like a new surf crew, if
Yeah.
you will? And so
Yeah.
it's about actually tuning into what we're doing and going, you know what, I'm going to make positive change, because the
Mm.
positive change, the mindful change, is where we start to grow. We realize our full potential. We might, grow into spaces that we never thought we could just
Yeah.
by changing that mindset, as you say.
Absolutely. That Andrew Tate thing's a real issue. I'm reading a lot about female, multiple female teachers, needing
Mm,
to leave a job they love
yeah.
because of the teenage boys carrying on like a pack of bloody idiots. With domestic, you've mentioned family domestic violence a few times, and it really troubles me, that there's like one woman killed a week, and I've just put a thing on Instagram and had a disagreement with somebody who doesn't thinks I'm completely wrong at raising that. It's not fucking wrong at all. Like, damn it,
Mm,
this is an issue and it's unacceptable stuff.
yeah.
But do you reckon that, and I'm that I always look for reasons, but I never will allow an excuse. Like you've got no excuse to harm someone else. Absolutely not. But reasons. Do you think that this toxic masculinity, that you're not allowed to talk about your feelings, you're not allowed to talk about this. Do you think that that is connected to a level of frustration held by men, and a fear held by men of a fear of rejection? Do you know what I mean? And that they're taught as a kid, you got to be a tough bloke, and so therefore then they start to exert this physical sort of dominance over people, and uh, ends up leading to bloody murdering people. So
Mm.
that's how I kind of see it unfolding. And what where like I'm asking you, I was just about to ask you the biggest question in the world. Where do we start? Where do we look at these, like what do we do with our boys? But it's okay,
Mm.
it's all very well for you to say, you've changed, you've thought about it, you've reconnected, you're on this mission, and that you want to teach your kids that this shit doesn't happen. And then you're also lucky enough to work with a number of men, that you can influence. But how the hell do we get to the bulk majority of people, and why isn't this stuff taught in schools? I'm asking you questions you can't solve, but it's like,
Well, let's
it drives
try.
me mad. Yeah,
I
yeah,
look at this concept as we're like a volcano often, like, and guys are taught from a young age, or not just guys, everyone's taught anger is one of those emotions that we're not really shouldn't
yeah,
engage with, but it is a healthy
yeah, I
emotion.
agree. Yeah,
It's just how do we respond to anger? How do
yeah,
we show anger? How do we healthily channel that into something that's not going to be the volcano blowing
yeah,
up? And so
yeah,
if you're thinking of every guy as a dormant volcano, and over the years, the pressure slowly builds up
yeah,
of wanting to talk about something or feeling like we can't talk about, or every time we did talk about something, we were shut down
yeah,
and told to suck it up. And I've been told to suck it up, and be a man and stop crying, stop being a girl, stop being gay, stop being a wussy, all
mm,
these types of things whenever I've shown emotion as a young fella. And so we become these dormant volcanoes that start bubbling and bubbling and bubbling, and we suppress it with drinking, for example. A lot of us,
yeah,
we do, we bury it deep down. We go to the pub, and that's our blowing off steam, is getting drunk.
yeah,
And it might come out in a word we say, or maybe a bar fight or whatever, like back, like, I don't want to say the good old days because they were probably never any good, but
yeah,
like in the old days, it's like that's what guys would do. They'd go off
yeah,
and
that's
just
right.
get physical with each other,
Yeah,
or they might join a really physical sport like rugby, footy, whatever, just to kind of release some of that in what they feel like is a
yeah,
healthy way. But if we're not given the language as well, and I
mm,
think this is where we can go into schools, is giving the guys, young boys, the language to talk about their
mm,
emotions in a non-judgmental way, and letting them explore all their emotions in a healthy way. Like anger, let's talk about anger. what
mm,
what what is it useful for, what is it not useful for? And maybe bringing their dads in for those conversations as
mm,
well, or the grandfathers, because this is intergenerational. This is
yeah,
not
it
just
is.
like what's happening now with our current students. It's actually,
Mm,
I'm talking to 84-year-olds about
yeah,
this stuff
yeah,
at the moment. And so it's about maybe, if their dads are still around, like I'm not sure about that 84-year-old, but
yeah,
bringing them into conversations, and
yeah,
I guess things like this are a good place to start. Is a podcast where you
mm,
can maybe give it to someone who's displaying that kind of behavior. So, how have you heard of Karen and Simon talking about this? It's a
yeah,
great episode. You don't have to say it's because you've got anger issues. You could just say it's a
yeah,
great episode about people talking about mental health.
yeah, yeah,
And so things like this we can do. We can start having those conversations. We can normalizing it. So this is what we're doing. We're normalizing mental health discussions. We're not hiding away from it. We're using swear words if we need to, or
yeah.
we say it as it is. And more of that. I think if we can, I think back to that footy example that we had as well, like Chris McDermott, the old Adelaide Crows. I think the ignore. I can't even say that word. The original captain of the Crows back in the
Inaugural,
90s. That's the
inaugural.
word. That's the word I was trying to say three
Yeah,
times.
yeah.
Um, but like we've come a long way in footy, for
Yeah,
example. Like now there's blood rules. Now there's
yeah,
concussion rules. Now there's you know, if there's a fight on the field, the cameras don't go to the fight like they used to.
yeah, yeah,
Like I think we're starting to evolve these. COVID was certainly a great thing for evolving, having these conversations. And I think we're only at the start of the race though,
yeah, I
by
do. Yeah,
starting these conversations. But certainly I think the government's highlighting this Tate stuff is really important. Crackdowns on social media if we can. Like, I mean, algorithms can do wonderful things.
yeah,
It's interestingly though, when I'm on my social media and I post a lot on things like TikTok and Facebook and all that, certain mental health topics are off topic. They're not allowed to be posted, or they don't get any views. The algorithm catches them out. But you put sexualized stuff on there,
yeah,
get some millions of views. You put
yeah,
gambling stuff on there, like the amount of TikToks I've seen of people just on pokies.
yeah.
Like we've got to crack down, I think, on a holistic, on holistic well-being,
Mm,
and allow mental health discussions, providing they're not too gory and going to really trigger people, but allow the conversations to have be had out, and also reduce some of those other negative impacts that guys hang on to, like the drinking, the drugs, gambling,
yeah,
sex addiction, addiction. Porn is another issue, I guess. Back in the day, I remember when I first saw my first magazine, it was something you actually had to physically go and get from the
yeah,
newsagent, or
yeah,
your dad had stashed in the cupboard or whatever. totally gross when you think about the concept of a porn mag. But now, like, your phone is so easily able to access
Yeah,
X-rayed, and it's not just like it is pretty foul, like the
yeah,
what you can see on the
yeah,
internet from it, and it's for free. Like it used to be like subscriptions, you had to pay for that, like kind
yeah.
of pay-per-view. Now it's all for free. And so young people have access to this on their phone. So maybe it's also parents being tuned into what their kids are consuming
Mm,
as a step. But as you said, like there's no magic wand, there's no
yeah.
immediate fix. These are things we can start looking at. And in fact, people are already looking at this type of stuff.
Mm,
But getting maybe more men involved in this conversation and encouraging them through
yeah,
me sharing my story. Oh, there's Simon, there's a guy talking about it. And I
yeah,
thank you for having this discussion around men's mental health on your show.
yeah,
Um, that goes a long way because we are sheep. We follow each other like a herd, like that gang stuff we're
yeah,
talking about. But the more and more guys that we do it, the more of our idols that can do it, sports
yeah,
figures, uh, politicians for some people, educators, the more I think we can slowly start going, you know what? It's okay to talk about this type of
mm,
stuff. I don't have to be that volcano. I don't have to resort to violence. I don't have to drink anymore. Like drinking culture in Australia is huge.
yeah,
You know, for many years I drank and I used to make fun of people that didn't drink.
yeah.
And now I'm the one who's sober and I feel great about it. I feel so much better. Um,
Mm.
so change is possible. It often comes within, but also the influences that we have around us.
And we need to be surrounded by good people that support us. Like
Mm,
your wife, I don't know how she stayed, but she did, and thank God she did. No, but I think that we underestimate
yes.
how much these people are supporting.
Yes.
And they're the good people. At the end of the day, they're the ones that just kept chipping, holding the space.
Mm.
Until a peacock finally flew out of the nest, and whatever you want to call it, I don't know, the phoenix come out of the fire or whatever.
I think it's a cross between the phoenix and the peacock and a lion at the same time. I think I was roaring as I came out of that. But you're right. Like absolutely. Like my wife has been the absolute rock for me. Like
Yeah,
the relationships that I had prior to that were people trying to fit me into their box of what an ideal partner should be. And my wife is the first person who just accepted me for who I was and guided me towards a
yeah,
better version of myself. Not because she wanted to change me, but she just wanted
mm,
me to stop hurting
yeah, yeah,
myself and wanted me to heal. And on my show, on my podcast this morning, I was talking to a trans man about
yeah,
his journey from being born female and then growing up and then
mm,
essentially becoming that trans man that he was always meant to be and
yeah,
essentially born to be. And he tells of the story of his wife, who he
mm,
met in his teens, who was the one person who always was his rock and could go to and share what was going on and share his true identity, even though on the outside world saw a different identity. So
mm,
certainly our partners can go a long way, providing that we actually value them as well and
yeah,
cherish
yeah,
them and love them. I see a lot in my work, a lot of separations and divorces. I think because the partners just are no longer either on the same page or they never were on the same page to start
mm,
with. So they're just
yeah,
trying to make it work.
yeah.
But I'm very lucky to have my wife and she's beautiful and yeah, she's just amazing.
Yeah, you are very lucky. Simon, thank you very much for joining me. This has
Yeah.
been a fascinating conversation, and it's one that troubles me a lot. You know the domestic violence in particular, and being female, and I'm sort of really on that hammer. Do you know that no, do not fucking do that. That's absolutely not
Yeah.
on. But I also have a very strong empathetic side to why does it happen? Do you know, like
Mm,
what are we doing to our men that are making them feel that they need to resort to this kind of behavior? Do you know? And it's not just because I'm physically stronger. It's because
mm,
there's other shit going on, and
yeah.
and I would love to get to the bottom of it. So yes, I love to have these conversations because I just you're right. If one or two people hear this and as a male and go fuck it, you know what? I'm going to go and check it out. Then
Mm,
we're already two people better. Does that make
yeah.
and there's a ripple effect to that. So of course you'd want more than two, but it's you can only chip away as you can chip away, and stand up, turn up each day, and do your best, and just hope that every single time you open your mouth, it has a ripple effect that one person changes, and that continues to spread. So Yeah,
Absolutely. And like even if that doesn't happen, even if those two people don't show up, every time I speak and open my mouth, I identify something in me that I go, oh, I didn't reflect on that like that. Or
yeah, yeah,
maybe there's a new memory that comes out because we often bury it so down that we forget all the traumas that we've
yeah,
been through. And so that's always happening to me. And so I'm always evolving myself too.
yeah,
So it starts with us. And then if we can help other people, that's awesome too.
yeah,
But yeah, it starts with just maybe sharing this episode. So if this doesn't
yeah,
relate to you, a listener, they can just
yeah,
share it with a bloke that's in their life and go, "Hey, listen to these two go off about mental health for an hour or so." It's pretty funny and good, and it just shows you how easy it is to talk about mental health. Like it
yeah.
isn't a hard thing. I've been doing this for a while now, since 2012. It gets easier every single time you do it.
Yep. That's what I say about anything. The more you practice, the more confident you become. So just and you should be embarrassed about your first episode or your first try. You know, if you are, it means you're doing something right. You're getting getting better.
Yeah.
But Simon, where can people find you?
Yeah, all over the socials. Just look up mindful.men.aus. That's my social media tag. Or the website is the W's, mindful-men.com.au. And also the Mindful Men podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, with conversations just like this with people all over the world. So,
Yeah.
but Karen, before I go, thank you so much for having me. I have loved this chat with you, and keep up the great work you're doing because it is so needed in this community.
Oh, thank you, Simon. And ditto back to you. It's been absolutely wonderful. Thanks for being so open and raw and sharing, with such enthusiasm, but also such vulnerability. I think it's really important. So thank you. Thank you so very much.